Okay, so we're building a model where individuals think of themselves and others more or less consciously in terms of social categories. So in these models, people are going to have tastes. So tastes here is what we, economists typically call preferences, but also norms for how people should behave. And so norms here could be this word prescriptions that George and I originally used. So people have utility from their own actions and others' actions. People internalize the norms and possibly punish those who violate from the social code. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to present to you this basic utility function, and then I'm going to use this utility function to describe two models where we can get minority poverty. Okay? Right, okay, fine. So let's start with a standard model of utility. So have the utility of person J be represented by some function of AJ and A not J. So AJ is J's own actions, A not J are others' actions. So the inclusion of A not J already brings us to the second category of models, right? Where people care about other people's actions. So this can be externalities, right? Other people's actions can have an impact on my utility. It also can be a way of writing down the payoffs from a game. So strategic interaction involves payoffs from own and other actions. So in the schooling context, we could have AJ is the effort of J in school, A not J is the effort of others in the school, which may or may not, which hurt or help J's academic achievement, right? So this might be the way you write down a standard kind of model of utility. So what we want to do is add identity ingredients. And the first thing I should say here is I'm going to do this in the context of schooling. I'm going to, schooling minority poverty. But in the context of schooling, I think I want to make this point, is that when we write down models of human capital formation or models of schooling, I think we have to think about who the decision maker is. And the decision maker is often 5 years old. Or the decision maker is 13. Now, is that decision maker weighing off the economic costs and benefits of effort in school versus the opportunity cost of leisure? I don't think a 5-year-old is doing that. I don't think a 13-year-old is doing that. So part of the reason for adding an identity, adding these identity ingredients which are going to come is to think about the child or the adolescent as the decision maker. And that decision maker is sort of very different than the sort of rational economic decision maker we normally have in human capital acquisition models.
Sorry, just to clarify from the last slide, so your utility is only dependent on your actions and others' actions, but not necessarily your outcomes and others' outcomes?
Those could be outcomes. It's very general, right? And so, yeah. Okay, so now what I want to do is add identity. So basically you start out with a standard utility function, own actions and other actions. These lead to wages, they lead to consumption, they lead to other things, right? Okay. So I want to add identity ingredients. And so the first thing I want to add, so this is sort of a recipe. If I'm going to look at an environment and I want to write down an identity model in the way that we're suggesting, the first thing you do is look at this setting and think, what is the social context? Okay? So you want to think about what are the social categories. So an individual assigns him or herself to these categories. And the norms give appropriate behavior and ideal attributes of these social categories. So let me give you an example of this. So example of social categories, we've been talking a lot about gender, could be men or women, right? It could be African American, it could be white. You want to think about the setting, the social setting, and what are the relevant ways in which people understand their social environment. Okay? That's very simple. Then you want to think about the norms which give appropriate behavior and the ideal attributes of each social category. So if I want to be a woman, it might help that I'm female. Okay, just to give you an idea. Okay, perhaps another provocative one. So the norms here, we're going to, again, look at the social context, think about the categories, and think about what defines these social categories in terms of how they're supposed to act, how they're supposed to behave, how they're supposed to look. So now we have a utility function that depends on own and others' actions and individual I's identity or self-image. And so now what I'm going to do is build this. Okay? So we have this little identity function. Okay? And it's coming up on the next slide. Okay, so that's just what I had on the previous slide. So now utility depends on own actions, other actions, and this identity, right? And so I should say that we use identity in two different ways, many different ways actually, and this is the problem with this word. But in the math, again, we're going to see what we mean. So we have this sort of identity utility, which is sort of figuring in, where's my little pointer? It's figuring into the utility function. We also use the word identity to describe an individual self-categorization or categorization of self and others. So I am a particular kind of person, and I also feel more or less well about what I do. Okay? Okay. So overall utility then depends on actions, AJ and A not J, as they affect economic utility, and also how they affect the self-image IJ. Okay, so that's the standard part, and that's the identity part. Okay? So this self-image or identity depends on acting as you should, which is a match between actions, okay, and the norms for the category to which you've been assigned, or you assign yourself. Okay? You see these elements I've got here? Everybody with me? Yeah. Let me answer that in a couple of bullet points. Okay? So right now, you just want to think of this as a static model. You've got an individual I, or J actually, who's the decision maker. This individual J has a category. They think of themselves as a particular kind of person, right? This particular kind of person has norms, right? And your utility depends on the regular old economic utility, but as well as whether or not you're acting appropriately according to these norms. Okay. So one is you're acting as you should. Another is how much you fit in, which is a match between J's attributes and the ideal of the category. Right? So your utility depends on the extent to which you fit in to the category in which you define yourself. And this is all going to come, we're going to operationalize all of this in our modeling later. Right? So if I think of myself as one type of person, but I don't actually fit the ideal, then I suffer a utility loss. Okay? And again, we're going to operationalize this. Another thing that your utility depends on is your status, which is the status of the assigned category. And this is given by, in some sense, the function. We can build this into the function ij. Okay? So if you yourself are in a category that has a lower social status, then you may have a lower utility from being in that category. Okay, again, I'm going to operationalize all of this. But this is all completely general. You see, it's like almost ridiculously general. Right, so there's a problem if you're a woman and you're supposed to act like a man. And you want to, so that can create a contradiction. So it's one of the examples, actually, it's in the book. So suppose I'm a woman, but I'm in a job that requires me to act more like a man. So now I kind of want to succeed in my job, but it requires me to take actions that do not correspond to my category as a woman. So now I have a problem, right? Do I act in the way that will make me succeed in my job? Or do I act in ways that are more appropriate or feminine? Right? And there, again, speaking of the law, there are court cases on this. Okay? This is in the law. They discuss these issues. Okay? Go ahead. Yeah, so yes, it is going to be vectors in the models. So again, right now it's really general. And then what we do is then we operationalize it. So right now, yeah, I said I was in firmer ground. I'm on slightly firmer ground. When I actually get into more nitty-gritty models, then I get in even firmer ground. Okay. Okay. So all right. So in the basic case, a person J chooses their own action to maximize utility, taken as given their category assignment, their own attributes, and the norms. So this semicolon here, if I can get it to light up, right, is the, you choose actions, and this is all given. That's the basic case. You can think about that as the short run. Right? In the short run, the social context, which I've now given you the ingredients that I want you to model, I want you to include in utility, right? That's taken as given. In general, however, a person could act to change their own category, their own attributes, or the societal norms, or, going to your example about parents, a parent may be able to act on the social category of their child, right? So there can be third parties that can take actions to affect the vector of categories, the norms for the categories, and the attributes. Okay? So that might be considered the long run. Okay? So you can think about individuals taking actions that can then change everything that comes after the semicolon. Okay? So we can think about this as short run versus long run. And these third parties can be people like parents, can be social activists, can be ministers, can be principals in high schools. I'm going to have an example of a principal in a high school, the head of a high school. Okay? Okay? So these are the basic ingredients that we're suggesting are included in models. And you can think about this as short run versus long run. Okay. So what I want to do now is operationalize this utility function. And I'm going to build an example of minority poverty, where hopefully I'm successful in capturing this idea of acting white. Suppose I have a large population of individuals with some characteristic E star. Yeah.
Sorry, you only belong to one category? You can't go to?
Yeah, so that's a great question. In all of our modeling thus far, you belong to one category. That is a shortcoming of what we've done. We know, and there's a lot of literature out there in the sociology and in the social psychology that talks about multiple identities and conflicting identities and so on. We have not tackled that modeling yet. Okay, and so I think that one way to start doing that is to think about things like models that involve time and consistency. So you sort of are one self in one moment in time, and then you're another self at another moment in time. So if you look at that theory about basically there's multiple selves, but it's not multiple selves in our identity sense. That might be an avenue into it, but we haven't done it yet. And again, maybe you guys will do it. Yes?
What if you don't belong to the category? What if your identity only comes from your own attribute that you gain from your parents? That, let's say you were raised in a family where you weren't really socializing with friends as much, and so all your identity really comes from your parents' beliefs, and what you believe is right based on that.
Well, so if the social context admits such a possibility, that would be fine. So we have a social category which is X, Y, and none of the above. So if there is indeed that possibility within the environment that you're studying, then that would be a possibility. So in some sense, there's a lot of literature out there which talks about how identities are often determined by what they're not. So in other words, if you grow up in that environment, well, you're not X and you're not Y. And the fact that you're not X and not Y tells you who you are. Okay? All right. So now let's sort of build a model. So suppose we have a large population of individuals, and all of these individuals have some characteristic, and let's call it a physical characteristic epsilon star. These people, each individual, can take one of two actions. There's action one, and we'll call action one working or perhaps doing well in school, and action two. So action one yields some sort of economic payoff, VI, and action two doesn't yield any economic payoff. And anyone who does action one has to pay some cost K if they meet somebody who does two. Okay, so this is I'm just building in some possible negative economic externality. The model actually doesn't need this, but I'm going to have two kinds of externalities. One's an economic externality, and one's an identity externality. Right? Okay? All right. Now I'm saying I'm looking at my environment, and I'm going to have social categories green and red. Okay, so in this particular social context, There's two social categories. There's green people and there's red people. Okay? There's norms, which is that greens should take action 1 and reds should take action 2. So this is all with my semicolon. So I'm not asking where these norms come from. Okay, so this is a short run model. I'm just taking the norms as given. Greens should take action 1, red should take action 2. Okay? The green ideal, right, is not E star. Okay, so to be a green, a real green, right, if I'm trying to be a green, right, if I want to be a green, my physical attributes do not match that ideal. Okay? So are you following me? So we label these green and red in some sense to get away with the get away from African American and white. So it's kind of the star. You did stars and diamonds, okay? So we're doing the similar trick of doing green and red, which is probably more confusing than illuminating. But the idea here is that if I'm trying to actually join the green category, okay, but I don't have the physical characteristics of what green's supposed to look like, I'm in trouble. Not in trouble. That was a bad word. Not in trouble. I'm going to lose utility. Okay. So there's identity utilities here. An individual I loses R if they try to adopt, if they do adopt a green identity, but they do not fit the ideal. Yes?
Just to be sure, so everyone has the characteristics?
E star. Yeah, so this was a simplification. We could have had two populations, one with a population EG and another population with E star. We just cut out the EGs, epsilon Gs. But there is you can imagine there's a population out there with epsilon Gs. Their choices are actually really trivial, so we just sort of cut them out of the model. Yeah? Right, so maybe to make it clear, and probably we should have written this way, imagine there's two populations, one that have characteristics epsilon G and one that have characteristic epsilon star. Okay? And then we look at the decisions of an individual in each population. The decisions of an individual in epsilon G are trivial. So the real issue is the decision of the people in epsilon star. Okay? With that characteristic. Okay, so you can think about these as whites and blacks. I mean, that's what it is. Again, we did the stars and diamonds trick. It's probably, again, obfuscates more than it clarifies. Okay, but again, you could make this Hispanics, you can make it North Africans, you can make it Roma, you can make it whatever you want. If it's relevant that these norms are such in the environment. Okay, so there's identity utilities. An individual I loses identity utility R if they adopt a green identity, but they don't fit the ideal. So this would be if, say, an African American tries to pass as white, but they don't really fit the white ideal. Okay? Somebody who is a red, who adopts a red identity, loses a quantity I sub s, R, if they do action 1, means they're not abiding for the norms for R. Right? So if you are R, but then you do 1, which is against the norms, right? Then you lose some identity. So this is, in some sense, the acting white problem. Okay? So if you are in the if you think of yourself as red, right, but you work hard in school. So if you think of yourself as black but work hard in school, you might lose some of your own self-image. You think you're doing the wrong thing. Right? And you could also, here actually it's the bottom one which is more important. An individual R can also affect other R's, and if you do 1, then you can be punished for doing so. So we have both identity externalities and economic externalities. So an individual who thinks of themselves as black, say, and does activity 1, there's possibly 2 losses. One is their own notion that they violated the norms for what it means to be black. The other is that other people think that this person has violated the norms for being black. Okay? Right? And this R business here is actually really, really key, right? It's going to come into the model here because if I try and I have an alternative from acting black, so of trying to be black, I could try and be green, right? I could try and be green. But how much am I accepted as being green? How much would an African-American kid who tries to be green, how much are they accepted as being green, right? Or white, right? Sorry, with all the greens, whites, and blacks. And that's this R. Okay, so this is actually making a distinction between these categories, right, in terms of these norms and ideals. So this is where it starts to become more of what we call an identity model, because we've got categories, norms, and ideals. Okay. So now we have these individuals, and these individuals are going to randomly match. Again, we're only worried about the epsilon star people. The epsilon G people aren't really in the model. Yeah.
If you could go one slide back. Just to clarify, I understand the distinction between punishing myself and someone else punishing me for
Mhm.
doing something
Mhm.
that doesn't fit my group. But what's the distinction between the first bullet and the other punishment? So this does not fit ideal social solution.
Actually, R and I sub S are going to, let's see. So what you do here, what you want to think of this is this is like an I, it's different. So this is if you adopt a green identity. So these two go together, and these two go together. So this is, if you adopt a green identity, you lose R. This is if you adopt a red identity, but do what you're not supposed to do. Okay, so let me go through this with blacks and whites. Okay, okay, fine. So I'm an African American kid. Let's suppose I try and pass as white. So I want to adopt a white identity. I actually want to try and adopt the white identity. How much am I, so now I want to be white. Okay. How much am I actually going to be able to be white? That depends on how white is defined. If white is a very, very, very narrow notion of white, so in the United States we talk about, there's this notion of the one drop rule. If you have one drop of African blood, you're not white. That's the, as opposed to in Brazil, right? So people, again, this is all discussed. I'm not making this up, right? This is discussed in the literature and discussed in the sociology. How narrowly is white defined? So if I try and be white, but I don't really fit being white because of this one drop rule, then I'm going to lose this R. In Brazil, for example, white is more broadly defined, right? So R might be smaller. That might be a way to think about the difference between the United States and Brazil, for example. Okay? Is that helpful? That's if I'm African American and I want to be, African American here is my epsilon, and I want to be white. Now suppose I'm African American and I want to be black. Okay, are you guys with me here? Then I have these identity utilities from the actions I take. 1 versus 2. So if I'm African American, so just let me get to the next slide. I think we're going to have a little bit more of a, so I'm going to hold that thought for a second and we're going to get to this bullet point. So we're going to think about people randomly matching, and individuals are going to be earning payoffs given their own identity, the actions, and those who they meet. And in equilibrium, each individual is going to be maximizing payoffs given choices of others in the population. So essentially, somebody in this population has 4 options. To be green and do action 1, to be green and do action 2, to be red and do action 1, to be red and do action 2. So everyone here that I'm worried about their choices have epsilon star as their characteristic. So they're, say, African American. They can say that think of themselves as white and do action 1, think of themselves as white and do action 2, think of themselves as black and do action 1, and think of themselves as black and do action 2. And each of these involves utility. Action 1 and 2 gives you these economic payoffs. And depending on the combination of identity and action, you get these identity payoffs. So if I'm African American and I choose to be black, but then I work or work hard at school, right, then I'm not being real to this to the black ideal, right, and I suffer utility loss. And other people also get mad at me. That's the externality. Okay? Is that now clearer than red and green?
I guess my question was, in the last slide, you made it seem as if it wasn't symmetric. Like the cost, obviously it can have different costs for going each way, but was the social exclusion?
Right, because I'm not, e.g., people who have a characteristic epsilon g do not suffer cost r. That's the big difference in the model. That's the social exclusion part of the model. So, again, we probably should have written this differently. But if there's a population that have characteristics epsilon g, right, if they choose to be g, they do not suffer the cost r. That's the whole difference between epsilon g people and epsilon star people. Yeah.
Is it possible in the model to kind of have a lot of characteristics of being one group, but then be categorized by others as the
Yeah, so at this point in our modeling, there is no divergence between what you think you are and what other people think you are.
and then there's not a big divergence between your individual utility loss and your social loss.
Say that again?
You can think of those as being kind of separate. Like I'm categorized as being black, but I really like all these white things, and then everybody doesn't like that I like all these white things, but I still like them.
That's in there.
That is
Because that's the VI. There's economic payout. There's the regular old preferences, like I like a certain, I like certain things. So that's here. So here it would be I take action. I have a little V sub I. V sub I is the returns from action 1. Right? So some people in this population could have a high V sub I. Some people could have a low V sub I. This action 1 is associated with the green identity. So that's, okay? So that's here. So again, going back to the utility function, I've got the regular old run-of-the-mill economic preferences things. And in fact, what you see in a lot of these models is distinction between what I like and what I should do. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm still a little bit confused. I don't really see the distinction. I know you put it in the model, and I'm not clear on why you put a distinction between what I think I am and what I want to do. So what is the difference between wanting to act white and wanting to be white in like a real world?
Okay. So, so in the modeling, CJ is who I am, right? And AJ is what I do. So we've just made a distinction theoretically.
Okay. So because you could, like, if you're talking about being black, and then you could somehow like be white, but then
Right. So maybe, again, this is not great. So we're making a distinction between your characteristic, right,
yeah.
and your category.
So it's more like generally like you can actually use categories based on that, right?
Yeah, for example. Yeah.
Bruce can follow up on that. So these 4 options, so I'm actually choosing 2 actions, choosing both the lighter and the heavier.
Yeah, and we're going to have that simultaneously. Given that everyone in the population has epsilon star, right?
Yeah.
Everyone in the population has the same characteristic.
And you kind of think of it as like who you're hanging out with, is that kind of what?
Right. Possible. Yeah. But there's random matching. So you're not actually able to choose who you hang out with. Okay? So what you're going to get, yeah.
I think it's about keeping things discrete and making things maybe starker than they might be. If I just thought of myself, I know I'm white, but I don't really think of myself very strongly as white. So if I want to do something, I have to go ahead and do it. And maybe everyone else is already doing that, but
I'm missing the discreteness part. Yeah, so that's I would put that in the N, right? So this is a bit like how I defined white. Do I want to make that really narrow, or do I want to make it broader? I could do that over, that was in terms of the physical characteristics. I could do that in terms of the appropriate actions, right? Is there an intersection, is there a non-empty intersection between appropriate actions for blacks and whites? Here there's not, right? But perhaps there is, and there is, right? And again, I also think it's important to remember that we're in 2013, right? And we're talking in 2013 United States. Historically, how about this? The United States did not look like it did in 2013 in 1950 or in 1920 or in 1880 and, or in 1850. And in many countries in the world, these intersections are non-empty. Are empty, right? So I think we have to really remember, it's very nice to all talk about this in this, right next to Hyde Park. But, we're in a very special place here. Okay, literally. Okay, good. All right. Okay. So what we want to do is think about these choices, and people are making these choices, understanding they're going to be bumping into people, and there's all of these externalities, right? Right. So if I choose to be one thing and do one thing, but then I bump into people who've made different choices, and there are these costs to me because of these externalities. Okay. So that's the basic social interaction model, and so you can write down the proportion of the population that adopts G1, and then P is the proportion of the population of Rs that adopt R1 versus R2. Again, I've sort of ruled out G2, and we can write down the payoffs from each option given the proportions of the population that adopt each of these possibilities, and you have many possible equilibria, right? Because again, it sort of becomes a coordination problem. If everyone decides to be an R, Rs versus Gs, you're going to have different outcomes, right? So there's many possible equilibria. But one thing I want to emphasize is that the existence of these equilibrium depend on R, which is exactly this social exclusion parameter. Is how finely is white, say, defined? Is it defined very narrowly so that somebody who wants to be white but doesn't have the right characteristics, right? How white can they really feel, right? So all of them depend on R. So and I think here's what's really important, if one conclusion can get from this, is that if you think that all green is sort of a good equilibrium, which is that African Americans, say, all adopt here, and this is to say a white identity, but one could say an identity that is more integrated within the society, right? This is only an equilibrium if R is sufficiently small, right? The extent to which somebody who's African American can really be within this dominant culture identity or this majority, this majority identity, it's only possible if R is sufficiently small. Okay, so again, the social exclusion parameter is really key. So the condition for all green being equilibrium, and again, this is not rocket science. This is all really easy, so you can just work it out. The social exclusion has to be less than the punishment for adopting a red identity. And you can get a population split. So some people adopting the green identity and some people adopting the red identity and doing action 2 if R is in the intermediate range. And this is, if R is in the intermediate range, what you get is the people with the high V's. So remember we talked about these V's here. This is the returns from doing action 1. People with the high V's who can actually get a lot of economic benefits from adopting the sort of white identity, right, will do so. And the people that won't, because the low V's. So you can find a critical V such that the population splits, right? So this is a kind of the, this is the kind of, going back to the sociology, there's this sociology on how the African American community has kind of been split into two pieces, where you sort of had the middle class and upper class blacks all leaving the cities once segregation ended, and you have the people living in the cities who have perhaps, say, low Vs, still in the cities, right, and suffering the consequences of the fact that the upper middle class and whites, the professional blacks, left their communities. And that would be this equilibrium. Yeah.
First of all, if you assume that
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Well, see, this is where the debate comes in. This is exactly what Bill Cosby and Grant Hill are arguing. Is they're saying that the black identity should include the possibility of being professional, getting educated, having a two-parent family, working hard, getting good grades. And so that's exactly we've built a model where the green identity, or the green identity has this ideal of epsilon G, right? And the definition of the green identity is the appropriate action for the green identity is action 1, right? And so it's exactly the debates over what is the black identity, which is this discussion I had. So I built a model with one definition of a black identity, which is arguably debated. It is debated, was what it is.
You've mapped it such that it has to be more. I mean, like, so if
No, I didn't.
Then you're talking about the Cosby show, would that show that white people? I mean,
Well, he would argue no, and other people would argue yes.
I don't think many people would.
Well, read the literature. So so a lot of people. So again, people will say that Bill Cosby was not representative of. So that, like there's the word what. No, go watch this documentary about the Fab Five.
Okay, well, what about
So-
respectability?
Sorry.
What about the
Yeah, but why are there So I don't want to get into I don't want to get into a debate about the debate. The respectability movements are exactly there because there are other people who are they're countering another.
No, but the respectability movement is about the opinions of whites and blacks.
Oh, okay. So I was thinking about a different movement. This is among black ministers and so on, right? So again, I think we should think about this also historically. We're now in 2013, which is a different world than it was in 1950, and a different world than we were in 1970, and so on. And so, what I don't want to do is get in here a debate about what is really black identity, because that is a debate that's not taking place in this room. All I want to do in this room for the moment is say, black identity, the black category, what it means to be black, right? First of all, people discuss it, people debate it, people are concerned about it within the black community and within the white community. So what Bill Cosby is concerned about when he did his pound cakes speech was exactly the notion that blacks themselves don't think of getting A's as being black. That was what he was worried, that was what his speech is about. So we can go read the speech. Now again, we can go on and on about this discussion, right? And in some sense, I don't claim to have the expertise to really, analyze the ins and outs and the rhetoric of that debate. What I want to do in terms of what I'm doing here is recognize that the debate is going on, there are potential many sides to that debate, and to bring it into the model. Okay? Right, and in fact, the point is that there's different notions of black identity. The fact that we're even having that discussion is because I introduced a black identity into the model to begin with. So the fact that there's possible multiple notions of what is a black identity, and that is debated, and there's actors who are trying to affect that, is something that we should be considering in our understanding of inequality, going back to the major theme of the week. Okay, all right, so let me give you another, Okay, so let me give you another model. And this model is more directly about a high school. So I'm literally going to be thinking now about adolescence. Okay, so here's another model as education and schooling. So imagine we now have a large population of students. And each student has two exogenously given characteristics. So epsilon I now is a vector, so I can make epsilon I a vector. And each individual has ability and looks. So each individual is ability and looks. This is IID, uniform on 0, 1. Okay, so marketable skills or payoffs come from an effort choice, epsilon I, and ability. So this is the, if you want to do effort in school, so you can think about this as effort in school, and your possible wages that you may get later depends on your effort in school, your ability, and then there's cost of effort in school, right? So this is your economic payoffs from, from effort in school. Okay, so this is standard economic model so far. Okay, what do we want to add? So again, this is the recipe. The recipe that you add is social categories and norms and characteristics, ideals, right? Okay. So I take a look at an American high school, and I say, okay, in American high school, let's think about, the literature says we might want to talk about 3 social categories. Of course, there's many more, but this is getting to the vector point. Okay, so we've got a vector of social categories. There is the leading crowd, which is probably a really old-fashioned word. Might be the in, I don't even know what it's called. The in group, the popular kids, whatever it is. What are they called? Oh, I don't know that word. Socians? What is it? Yeah. But this is the new word. I don't know what the new word is. Nerds are still nerds. I think burnouts are still burnouts. I'm not sure if burnouts are still burnouts. But, okay, you get the idea. So, again, many of you probably didn't go to an American high school. And what this is sort of remarkably consistent across the United States. It's almost shockingly consistent. The leading crowd is sort of the popular kids. They kind of wear the right clothes. They're really good looking, right? The nerds, you probably all know what that is. The kids that are probably, spend a lot of time working in school, and so on. The burnouts, you might not know what that. The burnouts are the kids who kind of hang out, and in the American context, they might be smoking pot in, I wouldn't hesitate to call it the playground, but sort of the grounds of the school. They're cutting classes and so on. Okay. All right. So those are the social categories. Now the norms and ideals, I sort of already led you into this. That if you want to be in the popular group, the ideal for popular group to be, the characteristic that is the ideal is to be really, really good looking. Okay. So that's L equals 1 is the ideal. And to be a nerd, you have to, the ideal for a nerd is having n equals 1. Okay, so what I've done is I've got these categories and I've assigned to them these ideal attributes, similar to what I did in the green-red model, right? Okay, so you're getting to see, you see the recipe.
I just have a question. You said, I only have one other data point, which is Germany, but from what I've heard, this is much more scarce and well-known in the U.S. So I'm wondering if you have any idea why this is so...
I don't know, and it would be this is why I'm trying to introduce it to those people who don't know the U.S. context. So I don't know, and it would be great for, again, I'm throwing out a lot of research questions to you guys. It is sort of remarkable that this is so consistent across the United States and you don't see it in Europe. Or you might see it in different varieties. It might be different kinds of notions of categories and crowds, but why is it so starkly different? Okay. All right. Okay, so then this is the n in the model, right? The n is telling us the ideals and the norms. So the ideal effort level in school is higher for the nerds than it is for the leading crowd and then for the burnouts. Okay, so this is the ideal effort level. And identity utilities depend on category, effort, and the fit with the ideal. So going back to the utility function, I'm not just really writing it out in a really simple way. Okay, so your identity utility, this is the I part of the utility function, depends on the social status of the category, right? The distinction between your own attribute and the ideal of the category, right? So this was in the other model. This was the R term, but now I've got a T, sort of scaling it a little bit more, right? And this is the divergence between my effort level and the ideal effort level for the category, right? So this is, if I think of myself as a nerd and I do low effort level, right, I get a loss. Yeah. Oh, yeah, I did. Here they are.
Yeah, but
Oh, you mean the yeah, I didn't. Again, so again, the burnouts is kind of the residual category here, similar to the way the greens were in the other one. Again, okay.
There's a fourth category. You want, so an individual I could be both L equals 1 and N.
No, yeah, so no, you get to choose one category, but you have an NI and an LI. So here's what I do. It's like I'm thinking about myself and I say, oh, gee, do I kind of want to hang out and be with the nerds, right? But, you know, and I think I've got a really low NI.
So if I choose N equal to 1.
No, you don't get to choose N.
Okay, so
No, these are given.
they're given.
Yeah, so each individual has two exogenously given characteristics.
Okay.
So you have an NI and you have an LI. Okay, so I have an NI and I have an LI, and the question is do I start to think of myself as a nerd? And if I've got a really low NI, it's going to be pretty hard because there's this loss here, right? Because I've got a low NI and the ideal for nerds is 1. Okay? Everybody all right with what we've got going on here? Okay. And then we've got the social status, which is that the popular kids have a higher social status than the nerds that have a higher social status with the burnouts. Okay, that's it. So it's similar to the previous model. Individuals are now choosing simultaneously their actions and their categories, right? So similar to the greens and reds and the 1s and 2s, but now I've got effort and school and category. And essentially what's going on here is that an individual is balancing the payoffs from the effort in school and the fitting into the category. So if we looked at these two together, we've got this, you get this payoff from effort in school, right? And you have these identity payoffs, right? So there's individuals worried about possibly fitting into their category, right? Which means fitting in is, you know, sort of how well do their characteristics fit in, which is exogenous, but then their effort in school, which is their choice, and their choice is then giving them both their payoffs and also an identity utility. Yeah.
I work less than everyone. Going back to the last slide, I work less than everyone in my category. Do I get positive utility? Or is it kind of a
Yeah, no, this is just an ideal. It doesn't depend on what everybody else does. So I don't actually have a social interaction. So you could build this model where I made these endogenous. These are, I could make them, the ideals depend on social interaction, but I don't.
I wasn't meaning that.
Oh.
I'm saying that that's not squared and it's not an absolute value. So if I like a slacker
Oh, I might be missing a squared term. I think I am. There should be a squared.
Okay.
Sorry. Yeah. That's why the 1/2 is there, of course. Okay. All right, thanks. So these kids, again, they're kids, right? So again, we have to remember these are kids. They're adolescents. And they're balancing payoffs from possibly effort in school. We can imagine they may even know about that. Well, actually, a lot of American kids actually are aware of that. But they're also really worried about fitting in. And so here is the equilibrium. The low L and the low N students choose to be burnouts, right, rather than L's or N's. And here is this issue of, you hear the expression wannabes? People don't want to be wannabes. Wannabes are people who want to be somebody else, but they can't, and they're called wannabes. And so these people have these low L's and low N's, and they actually are not even going to try and fit in with the L's and the N's. You're with me here? So you can't, you want to try and be a nerd, but you've got a very low N. Or you want to try and be really popular, but, hey, you don't got what it takes. You don't have what it takes. Yeah.
My school was called poser.
What was it called?
Poser.
A poser. So wannabe was a poser.
Yeah, so if you were trying to, like, if I picked up a skateboard, try to hang out with skateboard kids, they call me a poser.
Right, great. So, perfect. So wannabes, or posers. Okay. Now, the high L and high N students, now these are the very interesting case. The high L and high N students choose to be L rather than N. Okay, so now we've got kids with high ability who choose to be L's rather than N's. Why? Because the social status of L's is higher than the N's, which are the nerds. So identity payoffs lead to lower academic achievement because we've got a lot of high N, high L people that choose to be L's rather than N's, right? And so the ideal for L's is to not do as much work in school as the N's, as the nerds, right? So, yeah.
Aren't there also like people that are just on the verge of being able enough to be nerds, and so they want to fit in, so they work harder?
Yeah, so what we've got is the way these work is that you find these cutoff values of L and N, and this cutoff value is exactly indifferent between one and the other. And so, yeah, there are people that are right at the margin, but there is a cutoff value. Yeah.
Sorry, I wonder how this one is different to, obviously, burnout thing is a little bit different, but how do you, sorry, what is the gain from this over saying that you have to invest in it? So you have to put in some effort as well to be L. So maybe you're naturally better looking, but you also have to go to the hairdresser all the time.
Right,
learn how
right.
to do makeup on and do cheerleading.
Yeah, you could embellish the model in that way. So, you know, this would then be the action. So the actions, yeah, you could definitely embellish the model this way. Okay, so I think here's just a point, you know, that identity payoffs can lead to lower academic achievement. Okay, now let's think about a policy intervention. Okay, so we've got administrators of schools. And administrators of schools are concerned about academic achievement. Their goal, say, is to increase academic achievement. Imagine that's their goal. And what we now want to, so this is kind of a discussion I was having before with Chris, and perhaps Chris could tell you the better answer he had to a question that I answered. And here's what Chris was saying, is that if we write down a model, this is about the question about, you know, why do we actually need an identity model? And if we write down a model, I could maybe write down, you know, models where kids have lower academic achievement. But if this model is misspecified, so I've actually missed what's going on, then I'm going to have erroneous conclusions about policy. Okay? So this is a better specified model about a high school. Right? The idea is that I'm actually writing down actually a pretty well specified model about a high school. What's going on is actually the social arrangements among the kids. Has a lot to do with how much they're working in school. And if I have a better specified model, the argument for bringing in identity, then I'm going to have a better understanding of the implications of policy. Okay? So now I have this specified model, and this model is telling me that, you know, there are these social groups, and these kids are really worried about fitting in, and we can see these trade-offs between fitting in and academic achievement. Okay, so now let's think about policies. Let's consider a school policy to affect achievement by changing student social arrangements. So there's many policies that schools can introduce, right? You could hire better teachers. You can, which, wonderful, I'm all for better teachers. You could also think about changing student social arrangements. And here's a ubiquitous policy in the United States. So again, this is a sort of very specific to the United States. In the United States, we have athletics in high schools. Okay, we actually have athletic programs. You know, we have football, soccer, basketball, you know, lacrosse, right? So this is, again, a very US-specific phenomenon, but we have athletics in high schools. And there's another social category called jocks. And so the school, you know, we're sort of live in the United States, you think it's normal to have athletics in high schools, but it's actually a policy. And there's a lot of money and resources devoted to athletics in schools in the United States. So it's actual use of resources. So now associated with this athletic programs is a social category called jocks. These are the people that actually, you know, play on these teams. And they're usually, in the American context, part of the leading crowd. These are the popular kids, right? Okay, so now we have athletics, and let's have students have another characteristic, it's called AI, which is athletic ability. Okay, so kids now have three characteristics, L, N, and A. Right? And now students are now making the choice of category and effort. And there's this AI term, okay? So what happens now is we have students which are high A, but low L and low N now choose to be L's, or jocks, right? So what this phenomenon here is the kids who really, you know, again, we're making this thing, these are IID draws, so it's possible to have a high A but low L, all right? So these are the athletically talented kids who don't have what it takes in terms of looks or whatever fashion sense to be in the leading crowd, and they're not really have the ability to be a nerd, right? But they choose to be Ls, or jocks. They join the sports teams. Okay, so this is the phenomenon that is, again, well sort of discussed, is that you have these kids from, say, minority groups, which wouldn't necessarily have the abilities from their parents to actually engage in schoolwork, right? So they don't have that kind of home environment. Nor do they have the money, say, to buy the fancy clothes, but they're really good at athletics. And so this brings kids from these communities into the high school scene. And they're on the football team, or the whatever team it is. And in fact, there's also requirements. In order to stay on the football team, you have to get certain grades, right? So this brings some kids, it makes them more attached to the school, and then now they're going to choose this effort level that's associated with the Ls. Okay? That you may think is going to increase academic achievement. But then you have this other phenomenon. That you have the high athletic kids that have high N as well. But now more of these more of these high N kids, but they also have high A's, are going to choose to be L's rather than N's. So you get a movement out of the nerd category and a movement out of the burnout category. So you get two movements, right? So you've got the high athletic kids who would have been nerds, but now they won't. They're going to be on the football team. Okay? So this is, again, a ubiquitous policy in the United States. And we actually don't know, depending on how much you're drawing from the B's and how much you're drawing from the N's, whether or not you're going to get an overall increase or decrease in academic achievement, because you're getting an increase on one end and decrease on the other. One thing that's true is you're going to get less divergence, right? Okay, so hang on. So what I want to do is just say here, this is an example. It's really, again, really simple, really basic. It's simply saying, let's look at a high school. We're all worried about academic achievement and effort in school. Let's take a look at how kids are making this decision. Maybe social arrangements are important to kids. And if social arrangements are important to kids, let's think about what that could mean for school policy. And this is an example of it. I'm going to give you another example in a second. Okay? So we could ask the labor economists in the room how much work has actually been done on the effect of athletics on academic achievement. I know there's all sorts of endogeneity issues there. But, again, the issue is that we've got school policies and various kinds of school policies, and some of these school policies either directly or indirectly affect kids through the social arrangements.
There's an assumption here that to get accepted by the popular kids, you can be athletic or good looking.
Yep.
If you just change it so that you need to be both.
Yeah. So yeah. So again, well, I made this jocks as part of L's, right? Yeah. So I could make this again. I could embellish this in various ways. I think the basic point of the exercise is to think about how school policies affect kids' social arrangements, right? That's the basic point. Okay, great. Okay, so now I've given you two examples of identity models. I'm going to give you a third, and then I'll maybe get a chance to show you some experiments that are really not related to this per se, but I think I'd like you to know about. Okay, so now I've got another population, and I've got different ethnic and social groups. Now I'm just going to run through this really quickly. The curriculum is thought to favor one of the groups. Okay? So this is what I want you to think about. This is the debate over teaching English in schools and forcing kids to learn in English or not, for example. Okay? The curriculum is thought to favor one of the groups. The marketable skills and identity payoffs depend on the effort at mastering this curriculum, right? So it may be really important for the labor market to learn English in a particular way and to read classics of American literature, right? But that kind of curriculum might be aversive to kids from different ethnicities. Okay? And so there's a school policy which is can affect achievement by changing the curriculum. Okay, so there's trade-offs to curriculum choice. You can choose a curriculum that is more aligned with, say, the dominant culture, say learning English and making English-only classrooms and so on, right? And requiring certain pieces of literature to be learned. Or changing the classroom where you have perhaps different emphasis on English and how it's being taught, and the literature that's being taught in the classroom, which may make some kids more interested in learning because I see themselves represented in the literature, or it's somehow more accessible. Somehow school is more accessible, so that there's less of an identity loss, but there's also a trade-off because you may be losing on the marketable skills. So again, the curriculum debates in the United States are all about this stuff, right? School board fights, choice of math books, right? It's all about this fight. Okay. And so we have some interesting data on math versus English class. So, students seem to show more reluctance to attend English class in schools where they're minorities, where they are the minority, for example. Okay, so what I've done for you now, you may be as exhausted as I am, is, I've sort of run through the notions of how we build economic theories, and I've tried to argue why it's important to consider the social context. And I've given you various examples. So I've given you sort of the recipe that George Akerlof and I have come up with for what we think is important to look at when you're considering building a model that includes social context. So we have the categories, the norms, the ideals. We've got the economic payoffs, and we've got these identity payoffs. Okay? And in these various examples, we're showing that indeed policies out there that we actually observe people spending a lot of time and a lot of resources either debating or investing in, we can bring those into our models as well. It doesn't just have to be teachers' wages, okay, in our models. Okay? All right, so now I want to really switch gears, and I want to give you a sense of some experiments that are being done. Yeah. No, go ahead, Danielle.
I guess my question is, you talked a little bit in the three kinds of models, in the Chaire Blaise model about bringing in where the B underbar comes from. And I guess here we would wonder where the norms come from.
Absolutely.
Right. And so have anyone done any work on making the norms endogenous? We see the static version now. I think you call it 2.5 static.
Right, exactly. Very good. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. An addition change in policy, right? So, which is one of the ways I'm thinking about dynamics. Is there another way? Has anyone else done any work thinking about how the dynamics affect the norms?
Okay, so first of all, some of this can be done in very simply. You could make the in the high school one where kids are choosing nerds, burnouts, and jocks, whatever I had, leading crowd, whatever, those three. You can easily endogenize the ideal characteristics. That's pretty easy to do, right? So that becomes one of these models where it's sort of the people who choose to be nerds need to coordinate on an ideal, right? So you can think of where do the norms come from as a bit of a coordination game among people who are thinking of themselves in that category, right? But I don't think that's actually a particularly deep way of addressing it. I actually think that and so here the answer is, we haven't done it. I'm not sure that, I'm probably missing some literature. I know there's some people who are attempting to this, like Robert Akerlof is working on some models about how these norms emerge. So, but I think, getting into this again, I'm going to be on my last slide. The answer, I guess the really quick answer is no, I don't think we as economists have really delved into this yet. So this again is, I think work that I would really hope that people take on. Right, right. Yes.
Things from the perspective of society, but maybe not from the perspective of the group.
Right. So yeah, I do think there are some pieces out there. So the other one I would think of is Bessine and Verdier's work, which is a sort of an intergenerational transmission of culture. So that may work. There's some work by Sandy Darity, which works on African American norms. So we can look up, we can talk with Sandy when we get back to Duke about it. So there are bits and pieces. And this is not to minimize these bits and pieces, but I don't think that we've really sort of attacked this thing head on yet. Okay. All right, so let me get a little bit to these experiments about identity and inequality. And I think the basic point, I've got a whole set of slides. I'm not going to be able to run through, many of them. So what do I think the goal of these experiments? The basic question here is, do people behave differently towards others depending on their identity or social group? And I think we know the answer to that is yes, but how and where and why? And so there's a set of experiments. There's a set of experimental literature which is developing, which I think is extraordinarily exciting, and this is one reason I want to tell you about it, where the social category or the identity of the participants in the experiments and a manipulation of those is in fact part of the research objective. Okay, so we want to understand, for example, how people from different ethnicities interact from each other, people in different tribes or people in different communities interact with one another, whether they're willing to punish each other for more or less contributions to public goods, whether they're willing to give each other money. So the social identity or the social category of the participants becomes part of the design, right? Okay, you get it? And I think this is an extraordinarily exciting area of research. And it's also a very difficult area of research. Okay, so I just want to give you some examples of it. So in terms of strategic play, you see studies where do people have different expectations about how others will play in a game depending on the identity or social group. So are some people considered to be more trustworthy than other people, say in a trust game? In terms of social preferences, and I think this speaks to the point about inequality, do people have different social preferences about people who are in different social groups? Okay, so what is social? You may not know what social preferences are. Social preferences refers to my preferences over somebody else's income. That's literally what it refers to in a model. So I have my own income and I have your income. They figure into my utility. How much do I care about my income and your income, perhaps relative or not? Right? That's what social preferences are. How much do I care about the money somebody else has? Okay, and that's literally how it's defined in these models. So how much do I care about how the money that somebody else has? Does it depend on social category? And here we can ask the question, do people have preferences for inequalities? This was in one of my first slides. Can we actually see that actually some people want to have more money than another person? Do I feel better? Am I, in fact, willing to pay and reduce my absolute level of income? So am I willing to pay, right, to have more than somebody else? Right? What? Right. So, so you see this in work equity. So can you say that again? I just missed the beginning.
There are experiments in which workers derive utility for their co-workers being paid less for doing the same job.
Right. So this would be an example. I have to get the reference for you for reference. So yeah. So then we get I don't have a work context in the slides, but I should get that. So yeah. So exactly that's the point. Is that people are actually willing to give up. Well, actually, it's a question. Here's a question. Are people willing to give up money in order to have more than somebody else? And the answer seems to be yes. And here's the interesting part from the identity perspective. It's yes, but for whom? For whom are they interested in having more money, right? So it's not just that it might be that I'm interested in having more money than a random other person, but the experiments that I've been doing show that you're actually interested in having more money than specific other people. People who are like me, I might not be so concerned about the relative income, but people who are not like me, then I'm more concerned about it. There's a question over here.
Yeah, it sounds a little bit like there seems
Right. Yes.
kind of they want to pay, they want to give up a lot of things that everybody has the same amount. And other
Yep.
people, that's what you discussed. So my
Yeah, so
there's no,
absolutely. There, and what we find is actually there's a lot of heterogeneity in this. And so I'm pushing this point because this is the one that doesn't appear so much in the experimental literature thus far. On average, if you average across all people, you get the idea that people are inequity averse, so people don't like inequity. But if you look at the individual level, which is what we've done in our experiment, we actually see this heterogeneity. And we see a group of people, or set of people, who seem to have this preference for inequality. But again, depending on groups, depending on the social categories or the context. So the answer is yes. There are some, I guess you should say, do some people, right? Okay, so do some people have preference for inequality? And the answer is yes. And, given that we're in, asking a lot of big questions this week and during these lectures, I'd ask, okay, so what does this mean for welfare economics? So we're actually now in a world where some people derive utility, right? Some people derive utility by making somebody else worse off. So now if I'm doing welfare economics and I'm trying to think about, what is best for economic welfare, what do I do here? Do I weigh the utility of the people who get more utility from making somebody else worse off? Do I include that in my welfare function? Right? So this goes back, I think somebody raised Sen earlier. So Sen, has this, the dilemma of the Paretian liberal, I think that's what he calls it. Maybe you know the... Okay, very good, okay, great. And so here's the idea is that, I like to do something, but you don't like what I do. So you have to balance my utility from doing something, and I should be free to do what I want. This is the liberal part. I should be free to do what I want. But if you find what I'm doing offensive, I've lowered your utility. Now what do I do? How do we understand Pareto optimality or welfare in this context? Okay, so this is an inequality version of that. All right, so I've got 10 minutes. In these experiments, both where the social category or identity is a research objective, the challenge is often to design experiments with social group variation. There's two ways that this has been done. The one is to use real-world groups. So you actually have a subject pool where there are different ethnicities, right, already in the pool, or different members of different clubs. And you bring, these participants are in the lab and you ask them questions perhaps about who they are, or you can observe this as the experimenter, and that becomes part of your manipulation that you're matching people of different groups or different ethnicities. And these are real world groups. These are where subjects are coming into the lab having some sort of group membership or social category or so on, and that's manipulated within the experiment. And usually in these things you have to work really hard to preserve anonymity, because you're often doing this in a context that's a closed social environment, right? So it's at a university or in a village, and you have to worry about repeated game effects. Okay, so it's a challenge, but people have done it. The other thing that people do is they create groups in the lab. So these are fictitious groups. These are groups that are just created in the context of the experiment. Okay, so these are not real world groups. Okay. So let me just give you some examples of some experiments. There's this paper, Hirschman and Ganiti, Discrimination in a Segmented Society. And the objective here is to look at, for a taste for discrimination versus some sort of stereotypes. Big typo there. Do people discriminate per se, or are they concerned about the actions that other people will stereotypically face? So I'll just run through this really quickly. So I suggest you read it. So this experiment is done in Israel, and in Israel there's different ethnic groups among the Jewish students. So this is not Arab versus Jew. This is Jews, right? They're all Jewish, but there's different ethnicities within the population. They're the Jewish population that derives from European origin versus Eastern origin, and this is readily distinguishable by last name. And they play trust games, dictator games, and ultimatum games. And so one of the examples, I think, since I can't go through them all, is that in the trust game, you guys all know what the trust game is? So a certain amount of money is sent from one participant to the other, and then the other participant can send back money or not. And the more you send, the more you can get back if the person who sends it back actually sends it back. That's why it's trust. You have to think that they'll send it back. So there was actually sent less to those of Eastern origin, though the return was about the same. So even though people of Eastern origin actually were trustworthy in the sense that they returned the amount of money about the same as others in the population, they were trusted less. Get it? So we could talk for another hour about trust games and context. What I just want to show you right here is, again, we've got a specific social context. We have specific notions about stereotypes in this context. We have an experiment which tries to get at that in a very clever way. Okay? So there's evidence for stereotypes here, that people are sort of stereotypically think that people from Eastern origin are less trustworthy, even though they're not. Okay. All right. Okay, let me just run through that. Okay. All right. On social preferences, so getting to this basic idea of how much do people care about how much money somebody else has. Again, this is a really, there's a lot of literature on this in economics, and so here's some of the big papers. And the main result that you can get from kind of this literature is that people, I've got all sorts of bad words, sorry, not bad, this is wrong, this shouldn't be written this way, okay. It's another use of terminology that isn't exactly precise. But the conclusion you can kind of get from this literature is that people are willing to pay in order to either increase inequality but increase overall payoff. So you're worried about the total of the pie, right? Or you're worried about inequality per se. So this literature, sort of, the debate has been whether people are interested in paying to increase the overall pie or decreasing the difference in the payoffs. Okay. So that's part of what the debate has been about. And the neuroscientists have gotten in the game. And so just to say, there's now a lot of work on this. For example, from the neuroscience, they say we can actually see the value from equitable payoffs. I'm just giving you snippets of what's going on. And there's a big debate over the distribution of social preferences. So this gets back to the heterogeneity issue. So while we see certain things on average, right? So we see certain things on average, there is a recognition that some people may feel differently about payoffs of others than other people. So there's heterogeneity in the population. Some people are really equity-minded. Some people are total pie-minded, meaning they want to increase the total income. Some people are relative income-minded, and so on. But nobody's really actually tried to uncover this. It's just been a debate. All right, so, boy. All right, so let me just concentrate on this bullet point here. So then the question about social preferences has now been attacked where you bring in social groups. So there's this wonderful paper by Chen and Lee. And what they do is that basically, I'm sort of skipping slides here, is take this literature up here. Okay, so basically they take Charnes and Rabin, which is all about allocations between self and other. Right? And what they do with it is they create groups in the laboratory, and they look at self versus other across groups. Okay? And what they do is they use a particular paradigm from social psychology, which is called the minimal group paradigm. I mean, it's all explained up here, but I don't have time. So minimal group paradigm. And what that is groups subjects come into the laboratory, and they're divided into groups by some arbitrary criterion. So instead of subjects coming into the laboratory and they say, oh, what's your major? We're going to put all economics majors together and all humanities majors together, or we're going to put all Asians together, and people come into the lab and they're divided into social groups according to what are considered to be trivial criterion. And here they show them, the classic social psychology is you show them pictures of paintings. People choose which painting they like better, and then you say, as the experimenter, you say, we're going to divide you into groups according to how you answer to these preferences on paintings. So the groups are created in the lab from out of nothing. That's the idea. And they show that indeed social preferences here, okay, depend on group divisions. And what they show is that basically, on average, everybody is inequity averse. So they're still working on average, right? Everybody's inequity averse, but you're kind of less inequity averse when you're facing somebody outside of your group. So you still want to be fair, but you're less willing to pay to be fair when it's somebody outside your group. Okay? That's the basic result. All right. And so what I've done with some co-authors is I've tried to think about social preferences in terms of, first I want to get at individual social preferences. So I want to understand, can different people have different preferences? So some people are worried about total income, some people are worried about equity, some people are worried about relative income. So one is I want to think about individual social preferences. And I also want to contrast arbitrary groups, so these minimal groups where people come into the lab and you create the groups in the lab, versus a real world group. So we actually have two treatments in our experiment where we have subjects come into the lab and we create groups and we contrast their behavior in the created groups versus real world groups. And the real world group we're using is political groups. So we ask people their party affiliation, so they Democrats or Republicans or not. So we're able to contrast minimal groups, so again, these fictitious groups that are created in the lab and behavior in those versus real groups, right? Okay, and so we're able, so this is a test actually, we think, of the salience of identity, right? So the question here is it important in your social preferences how attached you feel you are to a group, right? So it's a way of trying to get at the impact of identity on social, not that it's there, we know that, so Chen and Lee showed that group divisions matter. We want to think about how group divisions matter to individuals, right? And because we're looking at the individual level, we're able to get individual attachment to group. You got it? So how attached is an individual to group may determine how they're behaving towards others. You got the idea? Okay, so that's the research objective. I've got 5 minutes to tell you what we've done. So the way we're doing this is we have a within subject design. So you observe each subject in a control and these two treatments. And we actually have some information about their political opinion, the party affiliations, and the demographics. And we're able to estimate individual social preferences using a mixing model. And so I'm not going to be able to get into the details of this, but the basic point is that we're going to be able to estimate and categorize people's individual utility functions. So rather than looking on average across individuals, right, we're going to use a structural model to get at individual utility functions. Okay? And we study the distribution of the social preferences. And so the goal is to test two hypotheses. Do subjects act differently in group versus out group? And the answer is yes. So this is just looking across all individuals and not making distinctions between individuals and individual salience. Just can we replicate Chen and Lee? And the good news is yes. We actually, if we exactly look at our data and we do the Chen and Lee exercise, which is just look at on average how do people behave in group versus out group, we replicate their results. But then we're going to look at the individual level and ask whether individual behavior depends on the extent to which, you can say, individuals identify with the group. And the answer is yes, it actually matters. The meaning of the group matters. So these group effects are not necessarily automatic. So if you read the sociology, if you read some of this literature, you bring people in the lab, you divide them into these arbitrary groups, and lo and behold, they act as if they're in different groups, right? Well, by looking at the individual level, we see that some people do that, right? Some people, the arbitrary group treatment, right? Imagine you treat some people, you say you're in different groups. Some people respond to that treatment, right? But some people don't. Okay? Get with me here? And those people that don't, here's what's really cool, is that they will respond to a group treatment that has meaning to them. Right? So, sorry? Yeah, we do have some people, well, yeah, that's really cool. It's great. We have about 25% of people. Let's raise that up to at least 32% of people. This is a minimum, because I actually am not adding up. So I think, yeah, okay, let's do 30. Okay, and that's the minimum number. 30% don't react to any of them. And here's what's really cool about them. Let's tell you what these guys do. 25% of people do not care at all about what other people earn. All they care about is what they earn. Bam, that's it. Okay, so these are like our economically rational people. All they care about is their own money, that's it. Consistently. Okay? 25, no matter what you do to them, no matter what treatment they're in. 7% of people, and again, what's interesting is we can know that this is the same person, right? I can actually follow this person and see what they do through all of the treatments, right? 7% of people, all they care about, again, well, not all, they do care a little bit about their own money, but only on the margin, right? What they care about is the relative payoffs. What they want to do is do better than somebody else, consistently across all treatments. Okay, now the other people move, depending on which treatment they're in. Sorry? Oh yeah, no, they're the other people. So that was 7% are always about they might like inequality people, and that 7% number, these 7% in all treatments act that way. Okay, and actually let me do the bullet points. Okay, so let me give you a sense of what we've done. So the subjects are divided into groups, and they allocate income to self and others. And what we first see is that should be a 7. Okay. Maybe it's a 6. Okay, but it's not 5. We see systematic heterogeneity of individual behavior. So going back to this point, 20% are selfish. They maximize their own payoffs in all conditions. Actually, I think that's 22. 5% are this dominant seeking, right? Inequity, they want to be more than other people in all conditions, okay? And this selfishness and dominance seeking is particularly predominant in the group context. So what you want to do is add to this number of people who do this in all contexts, right? You want to add to them more people who act this way when they're facing an out group. Okay, so we go from 20% to 35%. And we go from 5% or 7, whatever, to 20%. Okay? So what you get here is that 20% of you add a significant number of people who are concerned what they're willing to do is pay to have more money than somebody else when the other person is not in their group. Okay? And this is that's sort of a 20% number. Yeah.
Aren't you priming group identity to doing subject design?
Yeah.
Well,
That's the whole point.
The order would matter, right?
Mm.
I mean,
Yeah, so let
another
me...
way of putting this is that a between group design might have to...
Yeah, but we can, okay, here's the thing. So we run the asocial condition first, then we run the group conditions. So we always...
Why don't you randomize?
We randomize the two group conditions.
But
Not the asocial condition.
do you have order effects?
Do we what? No, we have no order effects. I should say we tested for order effects. We don't have any order effects. Wait, so let me... go ahead, real quick.
What do you mean by group? This is the color of the scheme?
Yeah, so let me get to that. So we have two group conditions. I sort of mentioned this before but didn't go into details. We have two group conditions. So this out group here, I didn't tell you what these out groups are. Okay, we have two group conditions. I mentioned it really fast before. One group condition is where the subjects are asked about paintings and lines of poetry, and we divide, and they're really, they're really very, very similar lines of poetry and very similar paintings. So we do the Clay and Kandinsky, classic social psychology. And you divide subjects into groups according to the answers to those questions. And it's all no deception, so it's literally the answers to these questions, and we divide subjects into groups according to the answers to those questions. That's the minimal group paradigm. And so we divide subjects into groups, minimal groups. We also divide subjects into groups according to their answers to questions about political affiliations and political positions. Okay, so we ask them, are they Democrat or Republican or independent? This is the United States context. And then we ask them about their positions on a variety of political issues that were big in the news at the time. And then we divide subjects into groups according to those. Then we have a Democrat group and a Republican group. Okay? You with me? And then I'll stop once I go through the next slide, I'll stop. So we have a Democrat group and a Republican group. And the important thing to know is that in the Democrat group, we have two kinds of people. We have the people who said they're Democrats. Okay, so we have people who said they're Democrats. They actually say they are a Democrat, as in the political party, right? We also have people who didn't say they're Democrats, who said they were independents, right? But whose political positions, and if you ask them, are you closer to the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, are closer to the Democrats. So the Democrat group is composed of Democrats who are party affiliates, as well as independents, people who say they're independents. Okay, in the United States context, it's the independents, or the none of the above, right? So this is our group attachment notion. So within this one group, we have people that are party affiliates and people who are non-party affiliates. Okay, the Republican group, we have a similar thing. We have Republicans who say they're Republicans, and we have people who are independents but are closer to the Republican Party. So we've taken the population that is in some sense on a spectrum and we divided them into groups, right? And in each group we have more or less attachment to that group. And you're going to see we actually have a really surprise result. We were not expecting that result at all. Okay, so I should say that we can't analyze the Republicans because we don't have enough of them, right? Our pool is sort of overwhelmingly Democrat. So we don't have enough Republicans in our sample. So all of our results and sort of the identity results are going to be in the group, the people that we've assigned to the Democratic group. So we're going to contrast the behavior of people who say they're Democrats versus the people who say they're independents. But politically in their positions are identical to the Democrats. You with me? Got it? Okay. All right, so here's the main results. The response to the group treatment relates to identity, but in a kind of surprising way. We weren't expecting this. Part of it is our own ignorance of the particular cohort. First of all, we weren't expecting there to be so many independents. There's a lot of independents in the college-age population now. Okay, and so we didn't know that, but now we know. And here's what's really interesting. The people who call themselves independents, right, actually do not respond to the minimal group treatment. Are you with me here? Okay. Right, versus the nothing treatment. So there's a control. So if you look at the independents, right, they behave in the minimal group treatment almost exactly as they behave in the asocial condition. And our interpretation of this is that these people who call themselves independents, this is our interpretation, we have no way of knowing for sure. These people who call themselves independents, I'm going to call them non-groupy people. These are people who maybe don't like to be in groups, right? So we've put them in the minimal group treatment, we've put them in an arbitrary group. And what we may be picking up in the minimal group treatment is some sort of heterogeneity in liking to be in groups. So the Democrats respond to the minimal group treatment. The political independents do not respond to the minimal group treatment. You with me? So these are sort of what I'm calling non-groupy people. Again, I don't know, but that's what I'm going to call them. Hang on. Then, if we look at the political treatment, the independents do respond to the political treatment. And the idea, again, our interpretation, is that this is now a salient group division, right? So they do respond in the political treatment. Okay? So their behavior relative to the asocial control is different in the political treatment. It looks more like the Democrats, but not as strong. And what's really cool is that, so the way you want to understand this is the minimal group treatment is almost a control for the political treatment. So through the minimal group treatment, we're picking up some perhaps underlying groupiness characteristic on the part of the individual. And then if we control for that, then we see how much the additional salience of the group matters. You with me? So for the Democrats, the people who call themselves Democrats, almost the entire effect is picked up by the minimal group treatment. You with me? So it's like they're just groupy people, and you put them in a group and they're going to respond. The political independents we're thinking of as non-groupie people. So you put them in the middle group, it doesn't mean much. And so you're going to actually have to add the salience. And that's the main results. And, okay, I'll just stop there in terms of the experiment. Yeah.
Do you have any other information about these, like test scores or something like that? Because you could imagine it's not too much group student behavior.
Oh yeah, these are Duke students. I should have said, these are Duke students. They're all, you know, we're talking sort of, as one of people say, we're talking about the sort of, well, I love Duke students. No, we're talking about a particular, these are really bright kids. They've all got really high test scores. We don't see any difference in terms of major or, and in terms of, economics, humanities. We don't see any difference in these things that we can pick up. So these are, again, I should have told you, our population, we've got 65% of our subject pool are Duke undergrads. Yeah. No, but we see the non-groupie people act really nicely to groupie people in the minimal group experiment, in the minimal group context. No, you are. You know that the other person is not in your group. You're told that. But the group division is arbitrary.
Yeah, but that's not sending you a signal as to how groupie the other person is likely to be, right? Whereas if you put the Democrat independent thing, by knowing you're a Democrat, you're sending you a signal that you're a groupie person.
No, because they know that they've been assigned to a group even though they're not groupie. So I'm a political independent. I've been assigned to the Democratic group.
Oh, okay.
Right? And I know that I'm not a groupie person.
Okay.
So when I'm now when I'm allocating money to various people, I know that among those people are people that are not groupie just like me. Yeah, we should stop.